What's the most terrifying thing you've encountered camping? I thought I was going to die when I heard the screams. My dad and I used to go hunting together when I was a teenager. He's your quintessential outdoorsman. Tall and thick around the middle. He had a big beard and a collection of flannel. You get the picture. My dad's told me all kinds of stories about being out in the wilderness. Stories about bears, mountain lions, moose, elk, badgers, wolverines. Stories about almost starving, getting caught in blizzards. My dad's even fought a few coyotes while hunting whitetails. My dad was fearless in my eyes for so many years. That changed after this horrid night. We were camping at the base of a rocky face in our favorite hunting area. The year prior was the first time I'd made my first kill. I was so excited for the next day. We'd get up early, before the sun, and head out for the meadow a few miles west. There was a good population of whitetails in the area. That night he was telling me about his time in Alaska hunting Kodiak bears. Mid-story we heard a shrill screech coming from down the ridge, north of our location. He stopped and smiled. Told me it was an elk. It freaked me out, but his calm attitude chilled me out. We heard it a few more times. It seemed to be fading farther and farther in the night. When we settled in the tent for shut-eye, he told me that tomorrow would be a great day. My dad loves to sing himself to sleep, so I gradually fell asleep to him whistling out some Bob Dylan tune. I remember waking up to him shaking my shoulders. "Dylan, we need to go. Come on, get up son, let's go." The tent was dark, my dad was dressed. I mistook his urgency as being upset. "Sorry Pop, must have overslept, is the sun up?" He shook his head. "No son, we're packing up. You need to get up now." I heard it then. Like a banshee's wail coming from the rock face above us. It was so loud. 5 seconds intervals of on and off absolute screaming. I mean, open mouth screeching. Goosebumps started to protrude on my arms. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight. "Dad, what's that? A fox?" He was crudely stuffing articles of clothing and trinkets into his pack. "No son. Up, now. Let's go." I started to pack up with haste. My dad's tone demanded no slacking right now. Everything seemed like a blur at the moment. The screaming above us was definitely distracting. On top of that, my eyes were blurry from sleep. I was groggy, and getting more and more fearful about my dad's tone and body language. "Dad, you have to tell me what's going on." He stopped, throwing his pack on the tent floor. He turned to me, bending slightly, and hushing his tone. "Dylan, I've never heard that sound, or whatever is making that sound, in my life. Earlier it was screaming for help. Before that it started to say odd words with no connection between one another. If it was saying words then it must be human, I thought. Do you think they need our help?" He looked up in the direction of the rock face. "I'm not sure it's a person. Get your things together and load your weapon." My dad is one of the most stringent gun owners I know. Him asking me to load my weapon in our small tent was not only against his usual gun safety creed, but it heightened my fear level. "Do you think we'll need our guns, Dad? It might just be somebody having a bad mushroom trip, you know?" He shot me a look that said this isn't a joke. "Dylan, let's go. The tent needs to come down." When we stepped outside, the scream stopped abruptly. Like mid-scream they noticed us. I quickly glanced up. No lights from the top of the rock. It was at least 80 feet high at the top, and to the best of my knowledge pointed. Hard if not impossible to stand on. We worked quickly while taking the tent down. In a matter of minutes we were ready with everything on our backs. The screaming started again, but different this time. Like a low whooping. Almost like the starting sound you hear when the ambulance siren calls. We started downhill, the sound trailing behind us. My dad had his pistol holstered to his waist and his rifle in hand. "Dylan, I'm going to fire a few shots. We'll wait for a response. If there are no responses, we'll stay the course." With that he raised his gun, firing 2 shots spaced apart. We waited in silence after the second echo died. Nothing. He nodded, and we pressed on. About a half hour later we exited the forest canopy, and began walking across a meadow. Halfway across the screams returned. They were at the edge of the forest, not whooping this time, but like high-pitched screams. My dad raised his hand for me to stop. He sat and listened. I was holding my breath. "Those aren't elk. Stick close, Dylan." My dad started walking at a pace that was even hard for me to maintain. He was taking long strides across the field, and stopping suddenly every few minutes to listen. The screams were definitely following us. How far it was from us I cannot tell. If you asked me for a rough estimate, I'd say a quarter mile behind. We reached the tree line on the other side, which then cascaded gradually downhill to a flat walk through the woods. The goal was to get onto a trail, across a little bridge over a stream, and down another trail to where the cars are parked. When we arrived on the way here, we were the only car there. It wasn't a real parking lot, just a place that hunters decided was a good place to congregate. "Keep up with me now, Dylan. I'm not slowing down till we get to the truck." With that statement my dad basically began jogging. My pack was heavy on my back, the straps digging into my shoulders. If it was heavy for me though, my dad's pack was probably triple my weight. The scream started getting closer when we were traversing downhill. The light from my lantern kept our path illuminated. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear. My goosebumps hadn't gone away yet. Every time I heard the shrill call of the screamer, I felt that tickle of pure terror in my toes. Like waves of fear, similar to being afraid of heights. My hands were sweating on the lantern handle. I felt sick. When we reached the stream bridge, my dad stopped. He was panting hard, but not as hard as me. I was a stocky kid, and not in the best shape at the time. It had been about 5 minutes of no screams. He looked at me, his eyes wider than ever. Dylan, we need to get to the truck. I need you to go ahead of me now. I don't feel comfortable having you behind me. I couldn't say I disagreed. I felt a lot safer having my dad watching me than trying to keep up with his lightning pace. I started going, trying to copy his pace, but he stopped me. No son, go at your own, we're close. All of a sudden, he finished talking. From the top of the hill, very close, we heard screaming. This time it lasted a long while. 10 seconds maybe. 10 long seconds. Dylan, move. That last mile is like an empty memory. I was walking so fast. My eyes locked on the ground trying to keep from falling, or tripping. I swear I could feel my dad's breath on the back of my neck. I was crying at this point. I'll admit it. The screaming sounded even worse than before. It was frantic. Like whatever was making the sound was desperate to reach us. The faster I moved and the closer we got, the closer it got. I heard the distant sound of an 18-wheeler on the freeway. I knew we were so close. There was a clearing, and I saw the reflection of our tail lights in the electric lamp light. My dad moved past me then, practically sprinting to the passenger side door. He had it open before I even reached the car. I basically dove in, his palm shoving my butt in, slamming the door. He came around to his side, opening his door, slamming it shut. His eyes were in the ignition, and the car moved before the lights were even on. As we made our U-turn out of there, we both looked to the edge of the forest. We never saw what it was, but over the roar of the truck engine, we could still hear it shrieking. I'll never forget that last time I heard it. Almost like a cackle or a laugh. A frantic, manic laugh. Its last scream was even louder. Almost as if it had used the last of its energy on one last screech. As we drove further and further away, my senses came back to earth. I realized that I was crying hysterically. I looked at my dad, who was white-knuckling the steering wheel, gazing head forward at the road. We stopped at a gas station a few miles down. He leaned over and embraced me. I didn't realize how truly afraid I was until it all hit me on the last stretch to the truck. We stayed like that for a long time. He was holding my head in his hands, just telling me it's okay. I was about 16 crying into my father's arms, but it felt warranted. My dad went inside to pay for gas a little while later. The clock read 2:14 a.m. The whole hike back to the truck had probably taken an hour and a half tops. We basically ran most of the way back. My dad and I never told my mother or sister about what happened. It kind of stayed between us two. I tried to talk to him about it a few times, but he told me what happened. My dad started developing mild insomnia in the years following. The few times we talked about it, he mentioned having nightmares. I'd had a few of my own, but they passed in time. It's been about 20 years since that night. My dad and I haven't gone hunting since. Maybe someday we will. Maybe we'll even go to the same spot. But probably not.